My name is Harper, I'm 30 years old. Today I'm going to talk about the day that at family dinner, they called me a failure, then were shocked when my driver showed up. It's a pleasure to have you here. Stay tuned until the end, and tell me which city you're watching from. I want to know how far my story has gone. And click on like, subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss the next stories here on the channel. I hadn't seen my family in over 4 years. Not a birthday. Not Thanksgiving. Not even a text on Christmas. So when my mother emailed, inviting me to a simple family dinner at her house, I stared at the screen for almost an hour before answering. The subject line read, "Dinner Saturday at 6, everyone's coming." Everyone. That meant my sister Lauren, her husband Craig, probably dad too if he wasn't golfing. Lauren would bring her perfect kids in their matching sweaters. I could already hear her voice in my head. Cheerful, smug, full of that thinly veiled superiority she never had to work for. Still I said yes. I don't know why. Maybe a part of me still clung to some pathetic hope that they'd see me differently now. That maybe time had softened them. Or at least given them a sliver of curiosity about the woman I'd become. I was wrong. The house hadn't changed. Same sterile beige walls. Same smell of pot roast and floral air freshener. I felt like I was 17 again, stepping into a space that always made me feel small. Harper. My mother called, her smile tight and performative. She hugged me like she was patting a stranger on the back. You look tired. Working too hard. I'm fine, I replied, forcing a smile. Just busy. Lauren walked in behind her, high heels clicking against the hardwood, wine already in hand. Wow, Harper, didn't expect to see you in something so casual, she said, glancing at my outfit, black jeans and a soft gray sweater. Simple. Comfortable. Apparently, offensive. It's just dinner, I said. She shrugged, sipping. Well, I guess when you work from home, pajamas feel like real clothes. The living room buzzed with polite laughter. Craig was talking stocks with Dad. The kids were in the corner, hypnotized by a tablet. No one asked what I'd been up to. No one ever did. Dinner was a slow crawl through memory lane, most of which didn't include me. Lauren recounted her family trip to Aspen. How Olivia got invited to join a youth leadership program. How Craig might make partners soon. Mom nodded proudly, interjecting with clucks of approval. I sat in silence. Cut my meat. Chewed. Smiled at the appropriate times. Waited for someone to turn to me. Eventually they did. So Harper, my dad said, leaning back in his chair. Still doing that thing online? Running my business? I replied, careful to keep my voice steady. He nodded slowly, as if it was a made-up word. Right. The computer stuff. Lauren chuckled. Do you still sell those little self-help webinars or whatever? It's a mentorship program, I said. We help women. Help women, she interrupted, raising her eyebrows. So like a charity? I swallowed. It's a business. We provide resources, coaching, and community. We've helped thousands of women rebuild their lives after emotional abuse. Craig laughed lightly. So, you get paid to talk? Basically, Lauren added. She gives advice on the internet. Wish I had thought of that instead of law school. The table erupted in laughter. I sat still. My fingers curled around the edge of my plate. My mother cleared her throat. Well, I just hope you're saving some money. That kind of thing doesn't last. People lose interest. And you're not getting any younger, Harper. I'm 30. Exactly. I felt the heat rising in my chest. That familiar, constricting feeling of being measured and found lacking. Again. Like always. They didn't know anything about my life. Not the women I worked with. Not the nights I stayed up building something from scratch. Not the tears, the therapy, the milestones. They saw what they wanted. A disappointment who didn't follow the plan. I pushed my plate slightly forward. I should get going soon. My driver's waiting. There was a pause. Lauren laughed, nearly spitting out her wine. Driver? What, did you Uber here? No, I stood up, grabbing my coat. I have a driver. Must be nice to pretend, Craig muttered, not even looking up from his phone. The doorbell rang. Mom looked confused. Are you expecting someone? I nodded. Dad stood frowning. You're serious? I walked to the door and opened it. There stood James, dressed in black slacks and a pressed button-down. He gave a slight nod. "Miss Harper, the car is ready." Silence behind me. I turned around. My mother's mouth was slightly open. Lauren blinked twice, gripping her wine glass tighter. My father looked like he was calculating something. Craig finally lifted his eyes from the screen. "I'll be in touch," I said, voice steady. "Thanks for dinner." I didn't look back. I slid into the back seat, James closing the door gently behind me. And for the first time that night, I could breathe. I was always the outsider. Even when I was still living under their roof, eating at that same dining table. I used to think it was my fault, that I just wasn't like them. Not sharp enough, not charismatic, not charming in the ways my family valued. Growing up, Lauren was the shining star. Homecoming queen, straight-A student, president of the debate club. Mom followed her around like a proud campaign manager. Dad was more reserved, but his pride showed in the way he introduced her to friends and co-workers. My daughter, the future lawyer. Then there was me. I wasn't rebellious. I didn't do drugs or sneak out or bring trouble to the house. I was quiet. I read books. I liked drawing and writing in my journal. I asked questions no one cared to answer. And the more I pulled away, the more invisible I became. By the time I was 16, I had learned to expect it. Lauren got the car on her birthday. I got a used bicycle and a speech about learning responsibility. When she got accepted into an Ivy League school, Mom threw a garden party. When I told them I wanted to study graphic design at a local college, Mom said, "Why waste your brain on something so unstable?" I remember once asking Dad for help with a scholarship application. He looked over it and handed it back without reading. "Ask your sister. She's the one who gets this stuff." So I stopped asking. I moved out when I was 21, after finishing community college and landing a part-time job as an assistant at a marketing agency. It paid barely enough to survive, but I loved it. I saw potential there, room to grow. My parents didn't see it that way. "You're living paycheck to paycheck," Mom said during one of our last real conversations. "That's not a life. That's survival." "I'm building something," I told her. "You're wasting time. You could come home, figure out a real plan. Lauren and Craig have connections." That was always the solution. Fold myself into Lauren's world. Accept the scraps they were willing to give. But I didn't. Instead, I struggled. I lived in a basement apartment with mold in the corners and heating that barely worked. I ate ramen more times than I can count. I spent hours outside coffee shops using their free Wi-Fi when my power was cut off. I taught myself business basics from library books and online forums. No one in my family ever called to check on me. They didn't know about the panic attacks. The nights I couldn't sleep because rent was due and I didn't know where it had come from. They didn't see the rejection emails, the failed projects, or the humiliating part-time gigs I took just to keep going. But they also didn't see the first time a woman emailed me to say my blog had helped her leave a toxic marriage. They didn't know when I started hosting support groups online and charging a small fee. At first just to cover the cost of software. They never heard the moment I realized this could be more than a side hustle. That it could become my life's work. Over time, I stopped reaching out. My phone grew quiet. Holidays passed. I wasn't invited to Lauren's baby showers. I saw pictures online of family barbecues, birthdays, beach trips, none of which I'd even heard about. Once, I called Mom on her birthday. She answered with, "Oh, Harper, I didn't expect you to call." I wanted to ask, why don't you ever invite me? What did I do that was so unforgivable? But I knew she'd deflect. She'd say I was too busy, that I made myself distant, that I'd chosen a different path. They never said it outright, but the message was clear. I was the failure. The one who didn't marry well, didn't climb the corporate ladder, didn't make them proud. So I disappeared. And in my disappearance, I found something else. Something real. I found women like me. Women who were made to feel small in their own homes. Women whose voices were dismissed, who were told they were too sensitive, too dramatic, too selfish for wanting more. I created a space for them, a virtual community where they weren't judged, where they were seen. That space grew. One forum turned into 10. One coaching call turned into a waiting list. I hired a team. I invested in tech. I built something I never thought I could. A real business that helped real people. And in helping them, I helped myself. Still, part of me wanted recognition. Maybe not love, not anymore, but at least acknowledgement. Maybe that's why I went to that dinner. Some foolish hope that time had changed them. It hadn't. That night, watching their faces as James opened the door for me, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that I had built a life they couldn't even comprehend. Sadness that their opinions still had the power to sting. They would never understand the weight of what I'd carried. But maybe I didn't need them to. What would you do if it were you? Tell me in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe and activate the bell to receive all notifications so you don't miss the next story. There's a strange kind of loneliness that comes with quiet success. No fanfare. No applause. Just the slow realization that the people you wanted most to notice never will. After I left home at 21, my journey wasn't glamorous. I didn't go viral. I didn't get lucky. I built everything one piece at a time. The blog started anonymously. I didn't want to be judged, especially not by my family. I wrote about self-worth, healing from emotional neglect, how to rebuild when the people closest to you make you feel like you're nothing. I wasn't trying to be a guru. I just wanted to feel less alone. To my surprise, people responded. Women from all over started emailing me. They weren't looking for advice, not at first. They just wanted to be heard. So I listened. I replied to every message. I started hosting live chats, then video sessions. I shared what had worked for me, boundaries, therapy, finding meaning in small victories. The first time someone offered to pay me for a one-on-one session, I hesitated. I wasn't a therapist. I didn't have credentials. But she insisted. Said I'd helped her more in one conversation than her last 3 years of counseling. From there, I created a basic structure. A digital space where women could join monthly support circles, get access to tools, videos, and eventually each other. I charged a small fee. It covered the software and my time. Then it grew. By the second year, I had hundreds of paying members. I reinvested everything into the business. Hired a web designer. Got legal advice. Set up a proper LLC. A friend referred me to an investor, but I declined. I wanted full control. No one to tell me what kind of stories I could share or which women fit the brand. We weren't a charity, though it felt like a lifeline. Some women donated extra so others could join. We ran scholarships. I started partnering with trauma-informed coaches, offering certified guidance in areas I couldn't touch alone. We hosted weekend retreats. I spoke at conferences. I sat on panels next to PhDs and best-selling authors. Me, the community college dropout. But I never told my family. Not because I wanted to hide, but because I knew what they'd say. It's not real. It's not sustainable. It's not respectable. So I kept it quiet. Even when I moved into a nicer apartment. Even when I bought my car in cash. Even when I started traveling internationally, not for vacation, but to expand our programs. I didn't post it on Facebook. I didn't share it on LinkedIn. The people who mattered most to me were already in the circle. Women who cheered when I hired my 5th employee. Women who cried when I got my first podcast sponsorship. Women who called me brave and a lighthouse. Not once did I hear those words from my mother. The last time we spoke before that family dinner, she asked me if I had found a real job yet. I said yes. I didn't elaborate. There's something deeply wounding about not being believed in. About achieving more than anyone expected of you and knowing that your success only makes them more uncomfortable. My family didn't hate me, but they needed me to stay small. My growth challenged the roles they'd assigned long ago. So when I stepped out of that house and into the car James opened for me, I felt something loosen in my chest. They didn't know I paid his salary. They didn't know I had just signed a lease for a co-working space with room for 20. They didn't know I was about to publish a book. Not a vanity project, an actual deal with a reputable publisher. The manuscript was finished. The cover design had been approved. They didn't know any of it. And for the first time, I realized, maybe that was okay. Maybe their ignorance wasn't my burden anymore. Still it hurt. To have built something with my own hands, survived everything I did, only to sit across a dinner table and be mocked for it. Like I was still the girl who couldn't measure up. But I wasn't that girl. I was a woman who had turned pain into purpose, who had mentored over 12,000 women across the country, who had received letters saying, "You saved my life." I didn't need their permission to feel proud. I just wanted it to stop hurting. That night, alone in my apartment, I opened the messages folder on my site. There was a new note from a woman in Kentucky. She'd just left a 20-year marriage. Said she had no job, no friends, nowhere to go. Said she'd watched all my videos in one weekend. "You reminded me I'm not crazy," she wrote. "You made me believe I still have a future." I stared at her words for a long time. They were more genuine, more valuable than anything I'd heard from my own family in years. I replied to her personally. And then I cried. Not because I was sad, but because it had taken me so long to realize I'd created my own family. One built not from blood, but from recognition. From truth. From survival. I was no longer invisible. Just not to them. I didn't plan to speak up that night. I told myself I'd just show up, smile, eat quietly and leave. Keep the peace. Swallow the bitterness, the way I always had. But something shifted. It was the way Lauren tilted her head at me, that syrupy tone she used when she said, "You're still doing that little online thing, right?" The way my mom reached for the wine when I answered, as if my words bored her. The way Craig scoffed when I explained what I actually did for a living, as if I were making it up to sound impressive. They weren't curious. They weren't interested. They were performing. And suddenly, I couldn't keep pretending. "Why is it so funny?" I asked, putting down my fork. Lauren blinked. "What? Why is it funny that I run a business? Why is it a joke that I work with women who've been emotionally abused?" There was a silence. My mom sighed. "Harper, don't make this dramatic." "I'm not being dramatic," I said, my voice louder than I meant. "I'm asking a question. You mock what I do, but you don't know anything about it. None of you ever asked." My dad cleared his throat. "We just want you to be realistic, Harper." "I own my company," I said. "I have employees. I built it from nothing. I didn't ask you for anything, not once. But the minute I speak, you all look at me like I'm lying." Craig shrugged. "It's not a real business if it's just feelings and coaching." That did it. I stood up. "You know what's not real? Pretending someone's worthless just because they didn't follow your path. You all think you're so successful because you have degrees and big houses and private schools. But you sit here mocking people who've survived real trauma, who've lost everything and rebuilt from scratch. That's strength. That's success. You just don't recognize it because it doesn't look like yours." Lauren stared at me, her jaw tight. My mother looked stunned. "I spent years begging for your approval," I continued, "trying to earn a seat at this table. But the truth is, I don't want it anymore." Then I did what I hadn't done in years. I looked my mother in the eye. "You made me feel like I didn't matter. For most of my life, I thought I was broken because you never looked at me the way you looked at Lauren. But I know now, I was never the problem." She didn't respond. That's when I stood back, placed my napkin on the table, and said what I hadn't planned to say. "My driver is waiting." Lauren burst into laughter, like I'd told a joke. "Oh, come on," she said. "You don't have a driver." Craig added, "What are you, Beyoncé now?" I didn't respond. I picked up my coat and walked toward the door. Then the doorbell rang. Everything stopped. I opened it, and there stood James in his crisp uniform, hands behind his back. "Miss Harper," he said with a slight bow. "The car is ready." I turned around slowly. The room behind me was frozen. My mother had gone pale. My dad was staring, like he didn't understand what he was seeing. Lauren's mouth was slightly open. "I'll be in touch," I said. No one spoke. I stepped outside and James closed the door behind me. In the car I exhaled. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was something else. Relief maybe. Or the final breaking of a chain I hadn't realized was still wrapped around my neck. We drove in silence. The city passed by in soft, glowing shapes. I stared out the window and tried to make sense of what I felt. I wasn't proud in the way I thought I'd be. There was no triumph in watching them fall silent. What I felt was done. Done trying. Done explaining. Done needing anything from people who had never really seen me. James dropped me off at my apartment and asked if I needed anything else. No, I said. That was more than enough. I sat on my couch for a long time, coat still on, bag still over my shoulder. Just breathing. Then I opened my laptop. There were 3 new messages in my inbox. One from a woman in Oregon who had just filed for divorce. One from a single mother in Texas asking how to join the mentorship circle. And one from a girl, just 19, who wrote, "I don't think I would have survived this week without your video." I closed my eyes. I let it in. They saw me. They believed me. They needed me. And that, I realized, was enough. I didn't expect to hear from any of them again. Not so soon. But 2 days after the dinner, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Lauren. "Lauren, hey. That was a lot. We should talk." No apology. No acknowledgement. Just that vague, self-protective phrase, "a lot." I didn't answer. A few hours later, an email from my mother. Subject: "Proud of you." Message: "I had no idea you were doing so well. Maybe we could have lunch sometime? Just the 2 of us." I read it 3 times. Not because it moved me, but because it was so detached. Like she was trying out a new role. One she'd never rehearsed. I didn't respond to that either. Something in me had changed. I wasn't angry. I didn't want revenge. I just didn't want to open that door again, not even a crack. The peace I felt after walking out of their house had settled in quietly. I hadn't realized how much noise they added to my life until it was gone. The overthinking, the second-guessing, the constant ache to be seen. It had all faded. I started sleeping better, eating better, laughing more. I spent time with people who didn't know me as Lauren's sister or Margaret's daughter. I was just Harper. Whole real enough. One morning, I opened a letter from the publisher confirming the official release date of my book. It would be out in 3 months. There was a small note attached. "We're so proud to have your voice on our list." I stared at that line for a long time. It wasn't family, but it was something. Later that week, I had a staff meeting with my team. We reviewed growth metrics. We'd doubled our subscribers in less than a year. One of my employees, Janine, said, "You know, Harper, I don't think most people realize the kind of impact you've had. You changed my life." That made me cry. Quietly, off camera, once the call ended. And still, I didn't respond to Lauren's text. Or Mom's email. Or the 2 follow-ups that came later. Wrapped in a desperate politeness that only made them feel more hollow. They weren't reaching out because they missed me. They were reaching out because they'd seen something they hadn't expected. That I was doing just fine without them. Maybe even better. I did think about writing back. Once. Just to say everything I'd wanted to say for years. To explain the damage. The loneliness. The scars they never asked about. But I didn't. Because I realized something. They wouldn't hear it. They weren't ready. And I wasn't interested in spending more energy trying to make them. Instead, I drafted a letter I never sent. I wrote, "You don't get to come back into my life just because you've seen the version of me that succeeded. You missed the version that struggled, that cried herself to sleep, that begged for love in silence. You ignored the building years. You don't get to enjoy the result. This isn't punishment. It's protection." I closed the document and saved it. Just for myself. Then, for the first time, I booked a vacation. Just me. A small cabin by a lake I'd seen in a travel magazine years ago. No agenda. No client calls. No content to post. Just space. When I got there, I sat on the deck with a cup of tea, wrapped in a thick sweater, watching the water shimmer. And I realized something that felt like a quiet kind of victory. I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. Not their approval. Not their apology. Not even their love. I had stopped needing what they couldn't give. And in that space, something new was growing. Something whole. It's strange how clarity doesn't arrive with a bang. It doesn't scream. It whispers. Mine came one morning, weeks after the dinner. I was back from the lake, sitting in my kitchen with sunlight spilling across the table. Coffee in one hand, my laptop open with a blinking cursor in the other. I'd been asked to write a foreword for another author's book, someone who once attended my workshops and now had a story of her own to share. I was proud of her. Genuinely. And it hit me. This was what legacy looked like. Not statues. Not applause. But people carrying something you gave them and building on it. I finished the foreword and hit send. And then, for no particular reason, I opened the group chat with my team. Scrolled through their messages, their emojis, their inside jokes. These women, many of whom I'd never met in person, felt more like family than anyone I shared blood with. One message caught my eye. Tanya, remember when Harper told us to write letters to our younger selves? I found mine again today. I'm crying in a coffee shop like a fool. I hadn't remembered that exercise. But I suddenly felt like doing it myself. So I opened a blank note. And I wrote, Dear Harper. They never saw you, not really. And that used to break your heart. But you kept going. You kept building. Even when no one clapped. Even when they laughed. You created something no one could take from you. Self-worth. Community. Peace. You are not the version they made you feel like. You are not invisible anymore. Not to yourself. I'm so proud of you. I cried. For the girl I used to be. For the woman I had become. Later that day, I walked through a small bookstore in the city. My book was on display near the front, face out. A staff pick. I didn't tell anyone it was mine. I just stood there for a moment, taking it in. Nearby, a woman picked it up and flipped through it. She read a few pages, then nodded slightly to herself, and added it to her basket. I left without saying anything, but my heart felt full. A week later, I got a final message from Lauren. Lauren, I guess I don't know who you are anymore. But I'm glad you're happy. That was the closest to honest she'd ever been. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Instead, I texted James. Asked if he was free to drive me upstate for a weekend retreat we were hosting. He replied with a thumbs up and the words, Always ready, Miss Harper. The retreat center was on a hill, overlooking a forest that turned golden in the afternoon light. I stood before a circle of women, dozens of them. Some had been with us since the beginning. Others were brand new. All of them were searching for something I once believed I'd never find. Belonging. When I spoke, it wasn't polished. I didn't rehearse. I told them what I'd learned. That healing doesn't always mean reconciling. Sometimes it means closing the door for good, and knowing it doesn't make you cold, it makes you free. They listened. And many nodded. Some cried. Afterward, one woman approached me. She was older, maybe in her late 60s. Gray curls and kind eyes. She took my hand in hers and said, You remind me of myself when I was younger. I just wish I'd had someone like you back then. I smiled. We have each other now. That night, I sat under the stars. No noise. No need to prove anything to anyone. Just me, and the life I had chosen. And for the first time in my 30 years, I didn't feel invisible at all. I felt seen. By the right people. By myself. And that, I realized, was all I ever really needed. If you like stories like these, click like, subscribe, activate the bell and send it to someone you think will also like it.